I'd like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar, Construction Strategies to Meet the 2050 Net Zero Target, which is hosted by Building Magazine in association with Time for Timber. I am Thomas Lane, and I am the technical editor of Building Magazine. The government has a target of cutting all carbon emissions to zero by 2050. This means the materials used for construction and the energy needed to operate buildings must be as close to zero carbon as possible. To achieve this target, we need to take action now. The buildings we are constructing today should use as little energy as possible, and we must start tackling the embodied carbon content of buildings too, as it will take the industry some time to adapt to new materials and processes. Timber has a vitally important role to play in reducing embodied carbon, as carbon is locked up in trees as these grow. The industry needs to learn how to make greater use of timber for construction, and we also need to address, as part of this, current concerns around the fire performance of timber to encourage wider uptake. To discuss these issues, I am joined by a panel of 5 experts. Andrew Carpenter, who is the Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association, Jeff Arnold, who is a Managing Director of the timber frame manufacturer Pinewood Structures, Simon Challoner, who is a Director of insurer Chase Underwriting International, and his colleague Philip Callow, who's also an underwriter. He's an underwriter with Chase Underwriting International. And finally, Matt Hode, who's the Technical Director of Architect HTA, who HTA do quite a lot of timber buildings. So in terms of today's running order, we will start with a 10-minute video which will outline some of the issues, and then once that's finished, we will then all as a panel discuss the issues that the video raises. I'd like everybody who is watching today to feel that they can also have their say, so we would encourage you to ask any questions via the platform during the video and also afterwards during the discussion as well. So without further ado, I'm going to start the video now.
The science on climate is overwhelming. I used to meet a lot of climate deniers 8-10 years ago. Now I meet relatively few, and I think we have won the argument based on science. If we don't address CO2, we're going to change the climate with serious social, economic and health problems. You know, we're using far more of the world's resources than we should be, and that will have to be addressed. We're going to have less impact. So in construction, we have to use more recycled materials, we have to use more sustainable materials, we have to use more timber.
We will build. Build back better, build back greener, build back faster.
What we're trying to achieve from an economic point of view is a circular economy. So you use something at one end and it then becomes a waste product and just goes back into the environment, rather than drawing something out of the environment, using a huge amount of energy into turning it into something useful and then creating a waste product. So wood is definitely part of a circular economy approach to construction, because you know the trees grow naturally, they absorb carbon while they're growing, and then they hold that carbon and store it while they're in the building, and then when the building's finished, that carbon can go back into the soil. So really that's how things were for most of our history, and the creation of buildings through brick and through steel and glass is a much more energy intensive way of building. So I think there's a really important role for timber in construction in a sustainable society.
People really want to make a contribution to, you know, resisting the destruction of our planet. And I think one of the ways that they can do that is you know, be enthusiastic about the use of timber in buildings. So we just have to be very clear about its performance values. Obviously fire being a key one, but we can do that. And timber has a huge part to play in sustainability. So I think the use of timber in buildings can only increase. Especially as we are now thinking very seriously about our own resilience as the UK and the potential for using more of our homegrown product.
Well, our definition, or my definition of mass timber, is an engineered timber product, so glulam or a cross-laminated timber, CLT, or an LVL, laminated veneer lumber. So these are highly engineered, using glue and engineered timber for structural purposes. It's been around a long time. It's not, everyone keeps talking about it as a new technology. I mean, it's new in comparison to steel and concrete, but it's not that new. And there's lots of examples around the world that we can learn from, in Australia, in America, in Scandinavia, in Central Europe. And we just need to learn from them and pick up their learnings and take that forward. So I think the opportunities are widespread.
Well, as you know, government have done the Future Homes Standard, so they've already set some milestones, and we as a business have sort of supported that, I suppose, by saying, well, look, we're going to go with that, and by 2030 we'll be looking to be zero carbon with our new homes. To do that as a major business, we know the challenge that come with actually delivering that successfully, and the key for us is we're pulling together a roadmap. We're quite lucky because, as you're aware, we've already built a zero carbon site, Hannam Hall, and we've built a zero carbon home, the greenhouse at the BRE. So we've got some, good experiences of how you meet the challenges of delivering zero carbon. But we're still talking about delivering anywhere between sort of 12 to 18,000 homes in the future to be net zero carbon. I suppose probably the most important thing is we've purchased a timber frame company. So I think our strategy is pretty clear.
The government last year made what I think was a really significant announcement, which was 5 key government departments have now been instructed that when they're actually commissioning construction works, they have to have what's called a presumption in favour of MMC. Now, it doesn't mean they actually have to use modern methods of construction. It means that they have to first look at modern methods of construction, and they then have to put forward a definitive argument as to why they can't use it. So it's a sort of opt-out rather than an opt-in. And to be fair, the Department for Education are very keen on this. They see significant standardisation in MMC. They obviously build something like 200 new schools a year get built. And so we are seeing this sort of trickle down from central government to the departments, and then from the departments to the suppliers. And so I think that over the next 2 or 3 years we will see a really significant growth in MMC. At the end of the day, if you're using steel framed MMC, or indeed precast concrete planks, which are still MMC, then we're sort of forgetting about the embodied carbon. So from an RLB perspective, if we're looking at the holistic project, if we're looking not just at how you build it, but how you use it, indeed how you might even take it down eventually, then clearly timber has a massive role to play in this.
I mean, the reality of it is we need a number of options, and I think we need more homes, therefore we will rely on all the technologies, but there's no doubt under MMC, timber frame has got a long history in this industry, which gives people confidence.
I think the future is bright. I don't think we're going to be building all of our buildings out of mass timber. I think we have to be realistic about that. But I think we're going to, you'll be cycling to work one day or cycling through parts of London and the UK, and you're going to see lots of mass timber buildings going up.
I've seen buildings across Europe which use timber and are meeting the sort of performance levels that we're looking for our net zero journey. So I'm absolutely confident that timber's part of that journey. We just need to be doing more of it in this country, and sooner.
We have to use more timber. We have to find ways of proving it's safe to address concerns on the part of the insurers. But construction is a big industry in the UK. It should be possible.
Well, I can understand why people might be concerned about wood being a combustible material, because we're just not used to living in wooden buildings in this country. But obviously plenty of other societies mainly have wooden buildings. You can think about Scandinavian countries and also the US, and there isn't an insurance problem there. And actually the biggest threat to insurance values is coming from climate change and the really serious and extreme weather events that we're having now, which are much more likely to create problems for the insurance industry than the very unusual event of a wooden building catching fire.
But increasingly the argument that there are financial risks in being unsustainable, which is what people like me and many other colleagues in the sector have spent years making that case to the insurance companies and to the pension funds, we've won that argument. They now recognise it. The regulators recognise it. So we've got large investors asking their fund managers for increased sustainability, and we've got the regulators changing the rules to force it, to force consideration of these issues. The insurers recognise the investment risks in their portfolios, in things like coal, in things like oil, and they're seeking to mitigate those. The interesting bit is what they do in their main business streams. Do they offer lower premiums to industries and to companies which are behaving more sustainably because there's less chance of those companies being sued? And we're beginning, I think, to see that kind of thinking in how they underwrite, in the insurance products they offer. But it's very early days, and there's more the insurers could do there. But I think that will be the trend we see going forward, is the sustainability thinking coming through to how they actually do the business of insurance as opposed to the business of investment. And that is where I think the construction industry, there are opportunities for it. If it shifts to a more sustainable model, I think over time the insurers will recognise that, and hopefully financial benefits will flow.
So when I first got involved in construction at Gallagher, we so happened to be involved in insuring what I think is still the largest CLT residential structure in Europe. And it opened my and our collective eyes, I think, to this market. We as a team, as a division, have realised that we need to be doing the right thing. This is only a growth market. It is the right thing to do, but also a huge opportunity if done correctly. And the world, there really only seems to be one way to take on the huge challenges set by the government around carbon neutrality by 2050 in the built environment. And the only obvious solution right now is timber, in terms of carbon credentials. So unless I've totally missed something, it seems to be the only answer right now, and therefore something that we have to understand, we have to embrace, we have to make work, otherwise we'll get nowhere near those targets. There's no other material out there.
I'd like to welcome our panel back to discuss some of the issues raised in the video. I guess the first question really to our panel is, how big is the challenge that is facing the industry, and crucially, where do we start in tackling this?
Thomas, may I start the ball rolling? Because I believe this is all about leadership. I think what there needs to be, in my terminology, is a JFDI way of operating. Unfortunately, historically, the leadership in the UK construction industry has not always been that good. But I would say that in the last 6 months during COVID-19, what we've seen with the Construction Leadership Council and what they've done with the Nightingale hospitals, with the site operating procedures and so on, is just prove how good we can be as a sector when the chips are down. In my 40+ years in the industry, I've never seen such a joined up construction industry as we have now. So that opportunity for me needs to be rolled through with this net zero agenda, with the 2050 agenda. So for me, it's down to leadership, and that means leadership at all aspects of the supply chain, from the client down. So that's my starter for 10.
And Andrew, is it a quick point? I mean, given the role that the Construction Leadership Council has assumed during the COVID pandemic, do you see them as continuing that in the net zero debate?
I would hope so. I mean, we've seen Boris, haven't we, with his build, build, build campaign to get us out of the recession. Interestingly, he decided to go to an MMC provider to deliver that message in the Midlands. We've got the 3 Build Back Better, which obviously is around the quality agenda, quite rightly, post Grenfell, post Hackett, and now the Building Safety Bill. We're absolutely behind that. Quality is central to everything that we do in the sector. We've got the Build Back Faster, which of course is the MMC agenda, and we've got the Build Back Greener, which of course is where we're talking today about the carbon agenda. So absolutely, I hope the CLC is here to stay. It's one of the best things I've seen in 40+ years.
Thank you. And I'm interested to hear the other panelists' thoughts on the scale of the challenge and where we start and how we tackle it. Where do we start tackling the whole issue of meeting net zero?
Can I chip in, Tom?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think it's the challenge is quite, it's a very big challenge. To get to net zero by 2050 for the country is huge. And I was watching a Tesla AGM yesterday in their presentations, and the ambition of Elon Musk is about, let's not wait, let's get on with it now. And I think there should be that sort of drive to, it's immediate, it's a real concern that we need to start moving the construction industry up the curve to zero carbon faster. And Oliver Novakovic and Barrett talked about 2030 for net zero. That's an ambitious target, and we should be aiming for the same sort of thing. What we can't be doing, I think, is maybe the COVID gives us an opportunity to reset the economy on a green trajectory. And at this point, perhaps what we should be doing is being much more ambitious with what we're building. We've seen how difficult it is to, if you like, retrofit, Victorian houses to make them zero carbon. That is one heck of a challenge to get to that. So you can imagine building houses now that are not going to help us get to the 2050 zero carbon. That's like a travesty in a way. We should be really being more ambitious. And I think, the whole sector, government should be, a lot more ambitious in the construction industry. And, timber is obviously plays a key part in that.
Okay, and Matt, as an architect, from where you're sitting, as a designer, you're obviously doing a lot of housing as well. So picking on Jeff's point, where do we start really with this huge challenge?
I think a lot of people will start with the idea that whatever they do now, whatever they think, has got to add up to far more than it's ever done before. Incremental change is good, but I think we need to, as Jeff says, we actually need to stretch ourselves now. And it's about what we build with. It's about how we design as a team collectively. It's not just about the design, it's about the construction, end use, circular economy. We've also got lots of other agendas which are in the news at the moment about what you build, what does it look like, how do renewable technologies fit into architecture, and for HGA, of course, that's residential. We have new forms of construction coming along, which are now well developed, such as MMC and volumetric. And I know that I think it's 80% of MMC generally is timber frame. So timber frame will continue to provide a significant part of the solution. And I think it's more than just the timber. It's about using every material that you design with to its best and ensuring that whatever you do is future-proofed.
Sure. Okay. And our two insurers here, do you have any views on this subject in terms of meeting the challenge?
Yeah, I guess our focus today really is going to be more around fielding some of the questions on insurance, which we're all aware is a prohibitive at the moment. But as an industry, I think we're aligned in terms of sentiment and intention. That's been demonstrated by a reluctance to be involved in coal, for example. So yeah, this is as much a learning exercise in terms of how we get there collectively as it is really a contribution at this stage.
I think what was interesting, Tom, if I may just jump in, was one of the speakers from the film indicated that the pressure on the insurance industry at the moment not to take into account the climate crisis would be greater than any other subject matter. So I think our colleagues from the insurance industry will have to look at this afresh because they may have bigger claims on their hands coming down the line if they don't, was I think what the message was from the film.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll be coming on to the subject of insurance sort of shortly.
Sure.
Tom, just on the housing market side, there's an affordability. There's an affordability issue that obviously potentially the more energy efficient you build a house, then the more it costs to build it, construct it. And there's been that argument about the cost of the construction, whether the consumer can afford to do that or to pay for the house with all this, this energy efficiency in it. And I know house builders have talked about that. It comes down to, I guess, land values as well, because that's where it all starts. And that's an interesting, how we get around the land value and then the cost of build and still hit the consumer price point. I think that's a heck of a challenge that we also have to face in this. There is the build cost and how that's factored in and afforded, by most people fundamentally. So I think that's an enormous challenge.
I mean, I guess the thing about housing is slightly different from the rest of the industry. I mean, I can completely understand that a lot of the development community, people with a long-term interest in their buildings, are sort of grasping the net zero agenda with enthusiasm. I mean, the challenge really is the house builders, because totally get your point about land values, but all the house builders' activity is up front. So obviously the purchasing land being part of that, the construction of the house, the materials that they use, the energy efficiency of that home, and all those materials are combined. But at the end of the day, they stick a for sale sign on it and walk away. And the less they can spend up front doing it, the better, because really, once they've handed the keys over, you don't really care really about how much energy uses. I mean, I totally get that. There are people like Barratt doing really great work, and they've done Hannam Hall, and they embraced the whole COVID sustainable homes agenda with great enthusiasm in the early days of that. But it's not true of all the house building sector.
Tom, I think it's true to say that still people buy houses on location, and so on. However, I do think there's a generation of younger people coming up through. I'm told now that the buzzword is purpose. These people are looking for purpose in life. And I passionately believe that these young people will start asking questions about how buildings are constructed, about energy efficiency, because it's in their DNA. So I am an optimist in that respect. It's not here yet, but I think the direction of travel that the likes of Barratt's are taking, and others, Countryside have bought one of our members. Obviously, we've got the link with Persimmon and Space4. It's growing. So there's an acknowledgement, I think, from the major developers that this is the place they need to be. And that I think is one of the reasons, because of what's coming down the line.
It's an interesting point now. Sorry.
Picking up on your point, Andrew, I mean, are the house builders sort of tapping to, said that young people have got a greater sense of responsibility when it comes to sort of carbon emissions? Is that one of the reasons why they're adopting this path?
My view is that there's a growing generation coming through the ranks at every part of the supply chain that have got a different perspective on business.
Right. If you were going to come in.
Sorry, I was going to say that the interesting point is the mortgage rates are really low at the moment. Those have been for many, many years. And then if you look at the cost of heating a home, it starts to become significant in terms of like equating that to interest payments. So if you've got a leaky home that's costing you a lot to heat versus your cost of a mortgage, the two things start to get together. So it's, it touches on fuel poverty ultimately at one end of the scale. But that's an equation. So maybe mortgage providers should be asking also, the cost of heating the home as part of the economic analysis of whether people can afford mortgages, and that would then drive that thinking as well.
But that sort of thinking has been around now for a long time. 20 years of people building exemplary developments which have 5 or 6 houses. We want to see change on an industrial scale. We want to see change through all levels in construction companies, whether they be house building or commercial. There are a lot of very good examples of where buildings have been built to ultra low energy consumption levels they're sort of going towards passive house. And once you get to those levels, you can begin to take out centralized M&E. That then pays for the uplifts in the insulation. And just looking what's going on in the industry with electric cars, you don't see cars with large engines necessarily being advertised with forests and people living healthily. It's electric vehicles. And I think the same is going to apply to housing. I think there's going to be a huge shift, and people are going to question what their houses are built of. What effect do they have on the planet? That's becoming a consumer choice. And the only reason that we're not further down the road, I think, is because of the crash in 2010. We had everything aligned with the Code for Sustainable Homes. You know, we were building advanced kit systems out of timber frame, and it was that really put us back. But I think we're back on track, and I think thinking is coming back in line with where we were then.
And I mean, Matt, because I mean, and again, from your practical experience here, I mean, if you are building to passive house, say using timber as a structural material, I mean, how much more does it cost than the sort of bog standard house builder offering?
Well, I can tell you that we have had studies done looking at mass timber and with the removal of centralized M&E. So you're relying on heat pumps. That could be a centralized heat pump locally to the block, or it could be to individual flats. We're talking here multi-occupancy, not so much as for individual dwellings. And the reason that's now become possible is because of the decarbonisation of the grid. So if you went back 10, 15 years, there was still too much carbon, really, I think, to justify the use of heat pumps. But as we get to the point where renewable energy is being used to drive that technology, those choices then become more sensible. And certainly it's a solution for where you have urban environments and space is restricted.
I mean, in terms of cost, I mean, you're saying that the from reduced plant needs makes it essentially neutral, or is there a percentage uplift?
No, when we were, I mean, I recently looked at sort of 6 months ago, where we looked at the figures with QSs and with engineers, and the removal of problematic M&E was one of the key considerations. And as you know, if you have a lot of M&E which is packed into communal corridors, and I'm picking on the multi-occupancy buildings because they're particularly difficult, they're a risk. They can go wrong, they take a lot of space, we are quite restricted, there's a lot of servicing going in. And if you can simplify what you build, you can really put your money where it's important. Generally, that's into the building fabric, into the materials you use.
Okay. I mean, my next question really is to look at sort of the relative contribution of the materials used to build buildings compared to the operation and maintenance. I mean, in terms of the percentages, what those look like, and really where should we be focusing on our energy? Should we be concentrating on operational energy, or should we really focusing on embodied?
It's not an either or, Tom, is it really? Shouldn't we be addressing the both? I think historically it's always been operational, but I think the call for embodied carbon measurement is growing rapidly. I know a lot of the major contractors and consultants of this world are beginning to have calculators where they can do that. So my own view, it's not an either or, but I do think the embodied carbon measurement needs to come up the pecking order.
And I mean, I totally get your point. And what I'm sort of thinking with some of the conversations I had recently with different sectors of the industry, they seem to be really struggling with the definition of net zero, because there's various definitions out there, is my understanding. I think the RIBA have got one. There's LETI is another one. There's sort of various ones out there. And it seems to be a genuine issue with people who are committed to reducing their overall carbon impact as to which measures to use. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? And because obviously this could be potentially a bit of a barrier towards action.
I don't want to hog the conversation, but the important thing for me is that the embodied carbon topic is now very much on the agenda. I think with all new topics, it's going to take a while to bed down to get, if you like, a unique measurement that the construction industry will adopt. Me personally, I'm working very closely with the RIBA because I think their climate challenge for 2030 is probably the best one I've seen, but then that's just me personally. I don't know whether Matt or Jeff or the others would like to comment, but for me, the important thing is, first of all, getting it on the agenda, and then in time, I think we'll find a one-off solution. But we're not famous for that, Tom, are we, as an industry? We tend to have lots of different versions of lots of different things. That's why I've been so impressed with the CLC and the roadmap to recovery, because that seems to have really got the industry together. So if we could maintain that on this topic, and it is one of their priorities, I think we've got a real chance.
It's an interesting point, I think, from a you know, who cares, if you like. So the homeowner cares about, you know, the cost of the energy, if you like, and how much you know, how much CO2 they're generating, going along what Andrew was saying before about people caring more about this as well. And then you've got the people who care about how much CO2 is being consumed building a new house. And I think they're kind of like two different audiences in a way. They're linked, obviously, but one is perhaps more sort of like UK wide, and then one's more at the individual level. But Andrew's right. I think you have to tackle both. And it just strikes me that, you know, with timber, everybody knows it's the most sustainable construction material. Then why shouldn't you use timber everywhere you can? Now, it doesn't work in all applications, and I'll be the first to admit that. And indeed, timber frame houses often have steel encompassing in them. They have concrete foundations. So nobody's saying that we shouldn't be using these other materials either. But, you know, why not use timber to reduce the embodied carbon right up front now, wherever it's possible to do that? And then, you know, if you like, regulate out others where it can be used.
Right, thanks. Sorry, we lost Matt.
HTA are signed up members of the RIBA Climate Challenge, and as such, it's central to every project we do. We do full sustainability audits of projects, and the calculations for embodied energy are becoming ever more important, and the software that's available now, we can plug pretty much directly into our 3D modeling software, so you can analyze what you're doing. But I think the principle is that you choose the best material for the job, and you know, that goes from the structural components, which it may be suitable to build something for high-rise with a concrete frame. We may be looking at volumetric systems for certain projects. We may be looking at timber frame, but everything is chosen very carefully for the specific issues, the constraints of each project. And I think you need to be aware of that. I think that's, from an architect's point of view, the most important thing. It's awareness of the appropriate application of a solution and the implications for embodied carbon. And I think there's a lot more training to be done. There's a lot more awareness. But I mean, as I say, the software is there to do the analysis. So we have the information now.
Can I ask you a question, Matt? On that list of hierarchy of, you know, what's the best for the job? What's at the top of that? Are you saying that carbon's at the top?
Yes. I mean, if you go to where we should be going, and you know, if I talk about smaller scale projects, I do think personally that either mass timber or heavy timber framing is a very good solution. In the past, we've incorporated thermal mass into that using different types of material. But the idea is that you sequester as much carbon for as long as possible in your home. So your homes become the carbon storage unit. I think that's something that's not discussed very readily at the moment, and it's probably because of lack of understanding of exactly how effective that is. But from the analysis we've done, that's incredibly important and should be, I think, a focus, certainly for the smaller scale, up to sort of 5 stories residential projects.
Quite like to sort of, you know, around this topic, sort of turn to the issue of, you know, promoting wider use of timber. I mean, clearly it's, you know, from what you're saying, it's obviously on ideal materials, or particularly for lower-rise projects. And it's been used a lot for housing, which is displacing concrete to quite a big extent with CLT. But we've had the whole issue around the combustible cladding ban, and there's a lot of nervousness in the insurance industry around the use of any combustible materials, and unfortunately timber is one of those materials, which cannot be helping to promote its adoption at the very time when we do need to be using it more and more. So I just really want to get the panel's view, and particularly from our insurers, how we can get over this challenge so that we can proceed with confidence towards our net zero future.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. First of all, just a quick thank you for allowing us to participate in this webinar, and also for the people that are in the audience. I'm quite aware that I'm probably the most overdressed person on this webinar. It was either the three-piece suit or I was going to wear my elephant suit. It's quite clear from discussions that we've had that insurance is the elephant in the room as far as this platform is concerned. It's seen as a prohibitor, and there are good reasons for that. Really, before I go into any of that sort of negative stuff, just to explain who we are in terms of how we fit into the process on the insurance side, which I think will be beneficial for probably most of the audience. So we're not an insurance company, and we're not an insurance broker. We sit between the two. So we are given insurance capacity by insurance companies, and we deal with insurance brokers. So just on that point, our views are our views. We're not official spokesmen for the insurance industry. I think we're pretty clear on the sentiment and where people sit at the moment. So really the issue has been one of reluctance to take on what is perceived additional exposure. Now, whether that's from a fire or a design or a water damage, a lot of perils that have caused significant pain to insurers of this type of risk, construction risk in the past. Our industry is fairly fragile at the moment. It's kind of coming out of many years of poor results. The market has contracted. And we're in a situation where there's an opportunity. I think the sentiment again is that everybody wants to be part of something that's good for the planet. I've not come across a single climate denier in terms of the underwriting world. There's a good feeling and a goodwill around that. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that I think when underwriters are under pressure on their existing accounts, to be asked to look at a risk, timber frame, mass timber, in difficult circumstances, and usually in isolation, because I think we all recognise that particularly the larger risks, the multi-dwelling houses, the commercial retail, as opposed to the single dwelling building sites, there has been a reluctance to get involved with that, and insurance brokers find it difficult to place that business for a number of reasons. It's something that insurers seek to avoid at the moment, and that's the honest answer. It's a fragile industry in that particular sector, and this is seen as potentially more difficult exposures ahead. Ultimately, it comes down to the risk and reward situation. In terms of the risk, we can debate and have debated the various risk characteristics, timber versus conventional construction, but ultimately the reward at the moment is very little in the way of a premium pool. Critical mass is important to insurers because, as we know, the premium of the many to pay for the claims of the few, and that's where I think the blockage has come. Our role in that is really to open people's eyes to the possibilities with an agreed set of circumstances to control risk.
Very much. I guess.
Sorry, that wasn't it, but I thought it's easy to get because, you know, that's pretty much where the market is, in my opinion.
And to be positive, obviously this is a robust industry in other countries, North America, Scandinavia, other parts of Europe are very well used to wood products in their building over many years. Insurance is a global industry, absolutely, but the UK and the UK construction market, you know, the UK is the home of global insurance, arguably, and it means that we get affected by losses in those countries as well, and poor risk performance. That said, it has been solved in those countries, and from a prototypical standpoint, from a difficult standpoint, the construction insurance industry does respond. And I think one of the areas that gives us great hope, that shows us that we're potentially on a cusp of change, is what the industry outside of construction insurance has been doing to improve the risk dynamics, to educate participants, any stakeholders, whether they be builders or owners, and what they've been doing to go forward. And there's two areas that I'm well aware of that give me and Simon and I great hope that the industry as a whole is going in the right direction. And that's the work the STA have done over the 16 fire steps to fire safety. A very interesting and important read for anyone concerned with risk and how to mitigate it. And then most recently, which I know has just been published, it's a very good questionnaire that is entitled Building System Questionnaire, Massive Timber System Use in High-Rise Applications. This has been published by the Risk Authority and in conjunction, published by the Fire Protection Association, developed through the Risk Authority. It does say massive timber system use in high-rise applications. Forget that. The questionnaire is excellent. This gives a wonderful way of us, although we haven't produced it, showing you as the industry what we require and the topics that insurers want to talk about and want to understand. And I really suggest anyone that is perhaps negative on the industry and negative towards the position that we appear to be in currently, to understand that education from our side is paramount. Yes, there is, as Simon touched on, the premium that needs to come in to pay for those unexpected losses, but risk management is key for us. It's key for insurers, and it's also key for the policyholders. And examples like that questionnaire and the 16 steps are fantastic ways of demonstrating to any stakeholder in the building industry what it is that insurers would expect you to carry out as prudent, and also how to explain to us what you're doing on site, what the methods are going to be, how you are mitigating those risks. And it's not just fire. Water is sadly a rapidly rising loss that is getting a lot of attention, and that's all types of water, whether it be from actual on-site leakage, so on, or actual weather events. And identifying and showing us, the insurance industry, that the building industry identify these, understand them, and the products have abilities to help with the risk management as well as on-site activities. So whether it be design or actually how you're building, go a great way into helping us explain to insurers why it is that these risks that seem so prohibitive are actually being managed to a point that we can offer a fair premium for the risk as presented. So there is hope, but I think now it's a very difficult time, but I think we're at the beginning, we're at the end of the bad time for this, and everything is a good step in the right direction to get essentially what you want is good cover at an affordable premium to make sure the development is possible and viable.
Tom, may I come in with a brief answer from an STA perspective? If
Absolutely, yes, please do.
So if we go back to your original question, you mentioned the MHCLG combustible materials consultation. I think I make two comments. First of all, we're eagerly awaiting the response, and I think that's taken longer than anticipated because of the number of responses they got. And we were delighted with the support we got from people like the RIBA and the CIC, for example, who acknowledged the importance that structural timber has to play, and they made particular mention they didn't want that including in any ban that might be forthcoming. But I think the problem from our perspective is that we heard that actually a lot of the feelings and a lot of the results were going to be based on emotion and politics and not fact and evidence. We see that fact and evidence and science needs to be central in any decision making going forward. We've been liaising with the insurance industry. You won't be surprised to hear we've had meetings with the ABI. In fact, next week we have a meeting with the FPA, because we are very clear that we want to be seen as part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we need to remove all the barriers we can from this essential growth in the use of structural timber. So we want to work with the insurance industry. I'm delighted, Philip, you made a couple of points which we feel also, first around education. We see that is absolutely essential, and we want to be part of that education program, but also the fact that we can take best practice worldwide, because if we go around the world, you know, 3 out of 4 homes are built in timber, the same in Europe, even in Scotland. So we can take best practice from north of the border, and that's what we want to do in terms of helping the insurance industry come up with the solutions that you need so that we can march on with this increase in the use of structural timber.
Yep.
That's all from me, Tom.
I think it's very important that the insurers do work very hard on this, because we've seen the zero carbon agenda, the net zero. Timber has a very, very important role to play, and for it to be driven out potentially by the insurance industry, then that's clearly going to have a detriment to that, is achieving that target. So there really needs to be a real redoubling of efforts to get people to get their head around it.
I think the insurance industry is very keen on sustainability, and it's demonstrated that with its response to coal and the use of coal in energy production. I can speak as a former broker. If something comes along, where a client comes along with something that's coal related, I mean, you've got to get very senior management approval to even think about doing it, and then you probably can't get it done anyway. But the problem is, it's how long this stuff takes to get through, because there are sadly bigger issues out there, and not just currently. And I think the film or was commented on natural disasters and their frequency and so on. This is really driving some pretty tough times in the global insurance industry. And what we're talking about here is a rounding error. So we have to really start pushing this, which is, I think a number of people are, and we certainly want to be a part of that, if not driving that ourselves, and from a UK perspective. There is no quick fix. We understand, everyone on this understands sort of big business and finance and insurance, and it's going to take some time. But education, as Andrew was saying, is key. And I think everything that's been going so far is absolutely in the right direction. And if you do come across a stumbling block, it's almost certainly due to information, how it's presented and or explained. So if you are planning on using timber products in a development and you think it's going to be an issue, you must engage with your broker and make sure that broker understands everything you are doing, so that when they see an insurer, or if they get you in front of an insurer, you can explain to them exactly why it is you're using these products and how you're going to build them, what methods you're going to employ to manage the risk. There is always an opportunity to get in front of people. We obviously can't comment for insurers or brokers, but from our experience, if we can get those discussions going, get those webinars, those Zoom calls, those face-to-faces where appropriate, you will get a better response, and that is all about education again.
Is there a general sort of, I'm going to use the word negative, I can't think of the right word right now, but towards the construction industry in general, we've seen things like, I'm pretty sure anybody who's taken out PI insurance, professional indemnity insurance of late, has seen their premiums quite increase. So we've seen, site insurance go up, and so I was just wondering if this is just a negative view of the construction industry at present in terms of risk. And this is getting caught up in that.
Jeff, I think it's just everything is cyclical, and we're coming out as part of that construction industry insurance area of a fairly low point in terms of the market cycle. And so, and there are people that are still bruised and battered, and I used the word fragile before, and that's kind of probably the best word to describe it. You know, I'm very conscious of the fact that I've painted a really negative, which is my speciality, by the way. That's why I'm an underwriter. A negative picture of where people sit at the moment, and you know, I stand by what I say, that it is that fragile situation where, as much willingness as there may be to move in the right direction that everybody wants to go, it's got to be based in a structured and controlled way. So the example Philip's talking about in terms of, you know, an insurance broker gathering as much information about a particular risk and going to an insurance market, all that is absolutely right. But my sense is that if as an industry and as a country, we want to move forward on a much larger scale with timber construction, then really there needs to be something that's far more robust at this stage. We need to be working on that so that there are no surprises, and that has to be around risk management. I know everybody talks about the price of insurance. Price is only one part to this. As I said before, it will be quite a long time before we can build up enough of a critical insurance pool for these type of risks, so that the insurers have to have confidence that everything is being done in such a way to mitigate risk. Because, you know, ultimately, the sort of size of some of these projects, and I'm not talking about the single houses, but the multi-story mixed developments, they can be quite substantial, you know, 20 to 40 million, and much bigger in the US. So the prospect of a single loss on one risk costing £20 million, if you put that towards the pool that we're trying to work to build up, it will take quite a long time to get there. So that's why the emphasis is on, at the moment, I would say people are trying to avoid having to look at these risks. Again, that's my opinion. It's the troubled child. But I think people's eyes are open to the fact that this is something that needs to happen, and we are better being part of the solution than trying to resist risks that are put in front of people. You know, we've seen signs of collaboration, not purely on the industry side, but also from an insurance point of view. There was a UK Mass Timber Forum that was hosted last month, which involved insurers from different companies and insurance brokers. You know, historically, that sort of thing doesn't happen. Everybody wants to guard their own intellectual property. Everybody's suspicious about somebody else trying to get an edge on what they're doing. So there are definitely signs that people accept that really to move this forward in a meaningful manner, then there has to be collaboration. And again, it's something we're working towards, as kind of being in between the insurance market from an underwriting point of view and the insurance brokers who look after clients. And we're quite happy to continue with that. We don't expect it to be resolved immediately, but I think the next step, as I see it, needs to be around risk management. And I think as an industry, step forward and say, there's some good stuff.
Can I just mention the building safety bill? I mean, the thing is, we've got this huge thing going through Parliament right now, which is really trying to make the whole process far more robust, from really right from the very beginning, right through to the very end. you know, and I mean, the whole idea is to make construction safe, make people accountable. Isn't that the answer?
I think that helps, most definitely. And you know, just going back 20 years, people perceive safety on construction sites as being better now than perhaps it was 25 years ago. I don't know whether the panelists agree with that or not, but there are other factors at play, you know, natural disasters, weather conditions, ambitious designs. There are many aspects to this that, you know, that sometimes negate results, but I think it's definitely a good message.
Tom, from our point of view, absolutely totally agree with what you've said, and absolutely agree with the direction of travel with the Building Safety Bill. I like to think that we're slightly ahead of the game. We've had something called STA Assure in place now for 3 years, and that's a very structured audit process for design, manufacture and erect, and we're tightening the rules and regulations on that all the time. So we've been on this direction of travel for quite some time. So fully appreciate and acknowledge and accept what the Building Safety Bill is trying to do. So and we're at the heart of it. I want to just come back, if I may, to the point that my friends from the insurance industry made about risk management. I'll take that one on board, and as part of the education process, we'll make sure that that's included. But what I would say is that this whole webinar, this Time for Timber webinar, is actually part of that education and collaboration process. That's why the STA are doing this in conjunction with others, to make sure that ball is starting to roll.
Good. I'm glad we're all sort of helping here. Yeah.
Also, use of technology. I mean, some of the things we've seen with the use of technology, the fact that everyone has a camera in their pocket on site anyway, and what we're hearing about how that's evolving into how a site is managed, and therefore responsibility and therefore accountability in the event of an issue or a loss, and then how that's then apportioned to the relevant policy, shall we say. So as that gets implemented and the uptake on that type of element of risk management, and it is just one, it actually takes out, attributing the accountability makes it much easier from dare I say, a blame, and therefore which policy should respond. A lot of time and effort and therefore money gets lost in, well, was it design, was it construction, and then what was you know where I'm going with that. And there are some rapid advances in technology which I think will greatly help that, which may then drive a more reasonable level of PI insurance premium, which we're all aware has been prohibitive for a number of people across a number of industries, not just construction.
It's worth noting, isn't it, that issues around fire are across the board, whether architects, for example, do timber frame or not. From our point of view, we're interested in the performance of the building envelope, which obviously contains the timber, unless you're designing houses where the mass timber is on show. I think that's a slightly different thing. We're interested in joining the timber to the plasterboard, to the insulation, to the membranes, and everything else that goes in the wall. And we don't design with identikit in mind. We design for the place, we design for clients. Everything's slightly different. You know, I've been talking to Andrew about things to do with performance for many years, and I know the STA have done an awful lot of work to develop testing and approach site safety, which is fantastic. But I think where we're heading now is more or less an agnostic idea that you can specify timber frame through performance, and whether that ends up being a type of standard like you would have CWCT that would give assurance to insurers that the correct materials, the correct performance is there, so that if contractors, builders wish to look on the market and find alternatives, they have to conform to the specific requirements.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm sorry to cut in, but we're actually sort of really out of time now. It's only scheduled to last for an hour. And I'm aware that we could debate this subject all day. So unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave that for another time. But I'd like to thank everybody today for participating, and I look forward to continuing the discussion another time. And thanks to everyone for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. For anyone who wants to see the webinar again, it will be available to download on demand. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.